Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum at Harvard Kennedy School. Tonight we are presenting the 2017 Pollak Lecture. We are honored and delighted that the lecture will be given by General Stanley McChrystal, who will, of course, take questions after his remarks. I just want to briefly introduce this lecture and our distinguished speaker. The Pollak Lecture was established in 1951 as a memorial to Gustav Pollak, who was an author, editor, and journalist. I looked him up this afternoon. He was born in 1849 in Vienna, Austria, came to the US, lived mostly in New York, where he edited encyclopedias and wrote often for The Nation and other periodicals, and he actually died here in Cambridge in a house on Irving Street in 1919. The gift in Pollak's name was intended to, quote, stimulate interest in government careers and research with a view to building a better government. It's a good, noble goal. Previous Pollak lecturers have been quite distinguished. They include Paul Farmer, who is known for his work in bringing healthcare to underserved areas in developing countries in particular. David Petraeus, the retired general and CIA director, and Shirley Ann Jackson, a nuclear physicist who is now president of RPI, the Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. Tonight, we are thrilled to have another very distinguished Pollak lecturer, General Stanley McChrystal. General McChrystal graduated from the U.S. Military Academy at West Point and joined the 82nd Airborne Division. He spent the next 24 years in the Army, rising to the rank of 4-star general. Along the way, he spent a year at the Kennedy School as a National Security Fellow. He was just noting about 20 years ago. He spent time with the Council on Foreign Relations. In the early 2000s, you might have seen him, you might remember him from the Pentagon briefing the nation about the war in Iraq. In the mid-2000s, he was commander of the Joint Special Operations Command, which is a counterterrorism force that, among other responsibilities, oversees special forces units, like the Army's Delta Force and the Navy's SEAL Team 6. General McChrystal's last military assignment was as commander of all U.S. forces and international forces in Afghanistan. Former Defense Secretary Bob Gates described General McChrystal as, quote, perhaps the finest warrior and leader of men I have ever met, unquote. Since retiring from the Army, General McChrystal has advocated a national service program in this country and has been writing and teaching about leadership. We're very lucky to welcome him to the Kennedy School tonight. General McChrystal, please.
On January 28, 1838, 28-year-old Abraham Lincoln spoke to the Young Men's Lyceum in Springfield, Illinois. He spoke about citizenship. Tonight I'll speak about citizenship. The comparison between the two of us ends there. Lincoln said, shall we expect some transatlantic military giant to step the ocean and crush us at a blow? Never. All the armies of Europe, Asia, and Africa, combined with all the treasure of the earth, our own excepted, with a Bonaparte for a commander, could not by force drink from the Ohio or make a track on the Blue Ridge in a trial of 1,000 years. At what point, then, is the approach of danger to be expected? I answer, if it is ever to reach us, it must spring up amongst us. It cannot come from abroad. If destruction be our lot, we must ourselves be its author and finisher. As a nation of freemen, we must live through all time or die by suicide. Now, you'll likely remember the scene, or at least the idea. Judah Ben-Hur, wrongly accused and convicted of attempting to murder a Roman official, has been serving as a galley slave on a Roman warship for 5 long years. It's tough duty. Ben-Hur and unfortunate colleagues are confined below decks, chained to their oars, and whipped as they're forced to row with the relentless cadence of a drum. While less morally ambiguous than modern politics, it's even worse than consulting. no free snacks, and little opportunity for self-actualization. You have the image of privation and terror in your mind. Now hold that. We'll come back to it. The past couple of years of mass migration, terrorism, in heretofore safe nations, and an era of emotion-centric politics have placed the issue of immigration directly into conversation, and the concept of citizenship indirectly into play. I care about immigration, but I think any consideration of who can live in our nation should be preceded by the question of who has the inalienable right to be here. Who are the stockholders in America? Who are citizens, and what does citizenship actually imply? Who here tonight is a citizen of any nation? And what does that citizenship get you? Well, it gets you rights. It gets you the vote, legal protection, things like that. It brings you benefits, brings you services, security, advocacy when needed. And what does it cost you? In reality, not very much. You have responsibilities to pay taxes, the requirement to obey laws, and being an American abroad can sometimes make you a target. But on balance, I think most of us think it's a pretty good deal. How did we get to be citizens? It took me 9 months to be a citizen. I don't remember much of it, but suddenly I was. Most of us are citizens by birth, and we didn't do much to earn it. Maybe our forebears did a lot, but we didn't. For others, the path is immigration and naturalization. And regardless of the route to citizenship, what is it when you got it? There are differing definitions. Citizenship essentially helps define a relationship that goes beyond that of your family, your clan, your tribe, religion, or ethnicity. It's the relationship between the individual and the state. Central to citizenship is the concept roughly akin to membership in a club or admittance to an elite organization. It carries more value because membership is not open to everyone. What about the history of citizenship? Where did it come from? For Americans, although it's implied in concepts underpinned in our Constitution, the term citizen was not defined by the Constitution until the 14th Amendment was added in 1868, which defined American citizenship as all persons born or naturalized in the United States not possessing foreign allegiance. But the concept of citizenship goes much further back. Now, bring that image of the galley, the Roman galley, back into your mind, but make it a Greek galley. At the Battle of Salamis, facing King Xerxes' far larger fleet of Persian warships, your galley maneuvers amidst the waves in mortal combat. 18 Greeks manned the deck with spears and swords, ready to fight, while below, exhausted oarsmen pull in disciplined cadence to move the galley through the water. But there are no slaves on the oars, only free Athenians, citizens, performing a duty that is as esteemed in Athenian society as it was dirty and dangerous. It was the same in Athenian and Spartan army formations. The strength of the force depended upon the cohesion of the formation, so the trust each soldier had in the valor of the others and their commitment to the cause was essential. It was too important a role to be entrusted to anyone else. Populations of the city-states such as Athens developed complex societies centered on citizenship and the rule of law. In their model, Greeks accepted responsibilities they viewed as essential to protect those rights. As related by Plato, Aristotle, and others, to engender the willingness of citizens to shoulder responsibilities, city-states evolved political models that protected the freedom of citizens from the rise of tyrants and sought to link their economic well-being to the security and prosperity of the state. Citizenship was a valued privilege, but one not extended to the many slaves who underpinned the economies of the Greek city-states. In ancient Rome, there were similarities but also differences. As Rome grew in size and power, it expanded the possibility of citizenship to broadly include conquered people, which served to align their interests with that of the growing empire. And Roman citizenship was a prized status. Following his arrest, St. Paul invoked his status as a Roman citizen to demand fair treatment under the law. But as Rome grew and matured, citizenship became increasingly transactional, specified rights for clearly understood obligations to the state. And citizenship became increasingly stratified, with the privileges of citizenship for some being significantly greater than for others, and practical participation for all citizens in their governance diminished. What's it like in America today? The body of study and thought on citizenship has continued throughout the centuries with an array of views. But like many, I would argue that the concept of citizenship in our nation has shrunk from a broad concept of inalienable responsibilities to each other into a portfolio of rights we often consider an inheritance we can possess and enjoy with little required of us in return. There are differing opinions on what the rules and expectations around citizenship should actually be. But here's the thing. The path to and meaning of citizenship are ours to decide. We set the rules. We decide what it takes to become a citizen. We define the expectations of citizens. There's much to the issue of who gets to be an American, but I believe we should focus less on the qualifications required to become a citizen and think more about what we believe should be required of citizens. I'm going to give a long pause so you can walk in. Les, how are you? For those of you with a short attention spans, I'm speaking about citizenship. All right. So let's decide what we expect of ourselves. Let's us do that. What responsibilities should we accept, and how can we make that a common expectation? Because I believe that citizenship is more than voting or even protesting. We have the right to be ourselves, but I despair if that right implies the right to be selfish or even the right to be mediocre. It's even more than being a loyal American or a good person. It implies you're willing to mold yourself through study, work, and contribution into a better version of yourself. Not perfect, just better. You need not do everything, but we should all do something. So how do we get there? I'm reminded of the true story of a young man who was a gang member, but now works with at-risk youth. Sent to live with his brother, he was exposed to opportunities to volunteer in his new community. The experience of having a positive impact on others changed his perspective and his life. In doing so, particularly in the aftermath of Hurricane Sandy, he found satisfaction and self-respect that had eluded him. Often, practical experience in making a difference is far more powerful than rhetoric. But reshaping the attitude of a nation toward citizenship is a massive undertaking. And how do we get that done? Where do we start? There is something we can do, and that's rebuild a culture of service. Give every young American a realistic opportunity and create a cultural expectation for them to serve. We don't need every young American sweating in a galley, but we need everyone pulling on an oar. We can focus on young Americans between 18 and 28 years of age at the point in their lives where habits and culture are still being shaped. A year of service anywhere across an array of fields, conservation, healthcare, education, or the like. If we consider civilian and military service as two sides of the same coin, we can create options for many young Americans for whom military service is not an option or not the right option. We can give every young American the opportunity to share the satisfaction of service, to be the citizens others salute for their contribution. The Service Year Alliance is working to make that a reality. The young man I mentioned earlier benefited from a program called Youth Build. and through his work for others, transformed himself. Multiply that story thousands of times over, and you have the legacy of AmeriCorps, City Year, Teach for America, the Peace Corps, and a spectrum of other proven programs that ask much of young Americans and give back far more in return. But with 4 million young people in every year group in our nation, redefining citizenship means multiplying those efforts not by a few thousand, but by many times that. We must give every young American a realistic opportunity to do a year of paid, full-time service and make that opportunity a cultural expectation in our society. So now we all cringe. It will be a heavy lift to expand such programs with the necessary rigor to ensure the experience has real value, and it would cost real money. And it has been since the youth of our grandparents since we thought so broadly in our nation or asked so much of ourselves. It's frightening. But consider the alternative. A society in which our already daunting divisions widen, our retreat from responsibility accelerates, and our expectations of citizenship shrink even further. The vision is one of a nation in undeniable decline, a march towards twilight, away from the dreams of our founders. Even if we rebuild the infrastructure of America, shiny new bridges won't span a divided population. Yes, expanding service would cost. But if you look at the social costs related to the social benefit, the numbers show that expanding national service actually raises efficiency. To build the program to have 500,000 members, the cost would be $10.1 billion. But in turn, this would generate $46.1 billion in total benefits, cost savings and benefits. To grow to 1 million members, service programs would need $27.7 billion. And that seems like a lot, but it would generate $92.6 billion in returned benefits. What if we show the courage and commitment to do this? What difference could it make? A study in 2016 found that 2 out of every 3 millennials were unaware of the Service Year Alliance. This large group of Americans have no idea that service can be a launching pad to success in their current and future careers. A poll of over 3,000 AmeriCorps alumni found an overwhelming response regarding improved problem-solving abilities and greater confidence within individuals. When looking specifically at the City Year program, 95% of participants expressed an increased ability to work as a team, while 92% felt an increased ability to work with a diverse group of people. Not only did they gain the opportunity to serve in America's communities and foster relationships, but volunteers develop skills that allow them to perform better in their careers, as well as give them a sense of direction in deciding a future path. 66% of City Year participants credited the program with preparing them for their career, and 81% completed further education after their year of service. So what difference will we see with a commitment to a full-time service year? It can give every young American a common experience of service, a window into parts of society they would likely not otherwise see, and a sense of pride from contributing to something greater than themselves. Add to that increased empathy, community engagement, some needed work experience and discipline, another indirect factor, and the argument is compelling. The choice is ours. Some years back, Margaret Thatcher repeated something she attributed to Edward Gibbon's The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. She said, in the end, more than freedom, they wanted security. They wanted a comfortable life, and they lost it all: security, comfort, and freedom. When the Athenians finally wanted not to give to society, but for society to give to them, when the freedom they wished for most was freedom from responsibility, then Athens ceased to be free and was never free again. It's time to choose. Thank you very much.
So now it's your turn to ask questions. I'll remind you of the three guidelines for questions in the forum. Number one, identify yourself. Number two, be brief, so many people have a chance to talk. And number three, really ask a question, not just make a statement. Gentleman up here, please.
Hi, General. Thanks for being here. My name is Ignacio. I'm a junior at the college. And this question is from Christian McGrew, a sophomore at Notre Dame, on behalf of the National Campaign Conference, which focuses annually on a topic related to political and civic engagement in the United States. Christian's question is, West Point famously emphasizes cultivating discipline and character, two qualities that are perhaps overlooked by millennials and younger generations. While you've mentioned that you personally benefited from the military discipline of West Point, how can these values be adapted to the civilian world to cultivate an appreciation for virtues beyond the resume in younger generations?
Yeah, that's obviously a thoughtful question. Now, here's the deal. I am 62 years old, and if you go into my bedroom and open the drawers, my underwear is still folded. Now, I don't want you to do that, but take my word for it. Now, you say, well, what is the point of that? And I think Bill McCraven said it brilliantly in the new book he's got coming out, Make Your Bed. There are things of self-discipline that make us better. There are a lot of things I do because for years I was forced to do them. Not because I suddenly said, it'd be a great idea if I did that, but I do them now by habit. And I've got a lot of habits, many bad ones, but I got some good ones that were literally beat into me. But I'm really glad I have them right now. And I think that's the same way of society. There are certain things you do because you do it for a while, and then you start to believe in it. One of the things they used to teach us at West Point, they say, we're going to give you all kinds of things like the honor code and discipline, and you're not going to even understand them. And then some years later, you're suddenly going to find how they connected to you and the difference they make. But you will have been doing that for a while. I'm a great believer that we don't learn simply by being convinced. We learn by doing something, then over time our minds say, okay, this makes great sense. I think that good leaders, we talk about what's the difference between a good leader and a bad leader. I'll tell you, the single biggest difference in my mind is self-discipline. Most of us, if we wrote down on a piece of paper what the attributes of a good leader and behaviors are, we'd get about the same list. The difference is who's willing to do it, because it takes work. It's sometimes not convenient. It's sometimes uncomfortable. And that's the way a society is. Think about a society where everybody had a little bit more self-discipline in how they treated other people. Think about when you're waiting to board the airplane next time. If everybody else thought that they were going to see that same crowd every day, if they were going to see them again, they'd suddenly say, wow, I got to be a little bit more responsible in how I act because it matters. And so I think self-discipline and how we act is really key. Thank you.
I can just add this national campaign through which this question came is an initiative of our Institute of Politics to reach out across the country. And the explicit goal now is reuniting America to try to bring people together, as your national service proposal would do very powerfully. Other questions? Here.
Hi, General McChrystal. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Aaron Bostelin. I'm studying education policy over at the Ed School, and I'm an alum of both Teach for America and City Year. And I want to go off something that Michael Brown said in a City Year video that I've probably seen 100 times in the last 10 years, where he said if national service did just one thing for the country, it would be worth it. If it brought Americans of all backgrounds together to unite side by side for a shared common purpose. And you echoed that when you said City Year alums say they're more able to work with people from different backgrounds. I'm wondering if in the course of decades of advocating on behalf of service, if you've seen a change in attitude or more receptiveness towards that sort of thinking, especially as the political situation has gotten more volatile in the 20 years, and if you have observed a change, if you could share some of your thinking observations with us.
No, that's great. And thanks for what you've done, and thanks to Michael and Alan for creating something that's literally magic. If you haven't been close to City Year, it's easy to say a word. I didn't even know it existed when I was on active service. And then I get out and you suddenly see how it transforms people. It does great things for society, but it transforms people in a way that I think is magic. Here's what I find. I go out and I talk to groups all the time about this. And most people go, wow, that's a pretty good idea. We ought to do that. Our enemy is not opposition. I don't ever have anybody stand up and say, that's a bad idea, we shouldn't do that. What we're facing is inertia. Our opponent is do nothing. And our problem is we don't have the habit in society anymore. Go back to the age of the Depression when we had the Civilian Conservation Corps and other projects. We had to have those, so we did them, and people got socialized into that idea. Then World War II, we had 16 million Americans in uniform and everybody else involved. Then the idea of doing stuff was just sort of second nature. Of course you would. Now at most dinner tables in America, and I criticizing my own generation, most times the parents don't have a service experience. So it's harder to look at your young kids and go, I think you ought to do that. They just didn't see it. And it's not because they're evil. It just sort of fell on the back burner. We allowed things to get small. We allowed Peace Corps to stay way smaller than it was currently envisioned. The military went all volunteer, all of which may have made some logical sense, but they just sort of sucked that habit out of our society. And so I believe what we have to do is put the habit in, put the muscle memory back in. And we've got to get the word out to people. And I get so tired of people going, it would cost a lot. It would be hard. The Boulder Dam cost a lot and it was hard. There are a lot of things that cost a lot and were hard. But if we let the citizenship in America continue to erode as it has, that's going to be harder than anything we can imagine. I'm counting on people like you to move it forward. God bless. Sir.
Hey, General, my name is Cyrus, and I actually work for a nonprofit called No One Left Behind, and we specialize in helping interpreters from Iraq and Afghanistan who serve with U.S. troops, help them get to the United States. And as I'm sure you're probably aware, they've kind of gotten the short end of the stick. And I guess my question is, with all your experience over the last 10, 15 years in the U.S. Command, looking back, and obviously hindsight's 2020, looking back, what are some of the things you wish that the U.S. would have done differently, whether it was within the Army or the Joint Chiefs of Staff or with the State Department, to maybe help out some of these people who very earnestly are willing, to put their lives on the line for U.S. troops, but when it comes time for the U.S. to keep their word and offer citizenship, they're kind of getting the short end of the stick. So
yeah.
That's my
Well,
question.
thanks for what you're doing. And I guess my short answer to what we could do differently over the last 15 years, I'd say nothing. I think we got it just about right. Kidding. We got it almost completely wrong, but not because we're evil. What you run into is expedience. And so just to put a little background on it, we went into Afghanistan, we went to Iraq, and we go into other places, and you give people a mission, and they're good people with a mission they think they've got to get done, and they go to get it done. And so you find people who will work with you, and the first people you look for is people who speak English or whatever, and they start to be your interlocutor. Sometimes they are the corrupt warlords from before, sometimes they are not. Then you need clever people to interpret and work for you, and they start to show up. You say, well, we got to pay them a good wage, so we'll get good people. And what you find pretty soon is your interpreters and the other people working for you are doctors, lawyers, judges, and people who are critical to that society working. And because we pay more and whatnot, we sort of suck the technocrats and other leaders out of society. And so we create unintended negative effects, all with good intentions, all trying to do the right thing. Then you create that relationship where, in many ways, they're in a position now where it's very difficult for them in society, particularly over an extended period, because they've left their vocation. They've also become somebody allied with the West or the United States or whatever, and it's very tough for them to safely stay there. Now, I'm conflicted on the issue, quite honest, because part of me says, things aren't going well. We want to be thoughtful. We want to be considerate. So we want to offer them the opportunity to come here out of loyalty. But again, it has that same sucking sound. It sucks the intelligentsia out of a country that desperately needs it going forward. And so, on the one hand, I do support us doing that. I do it with very conflicted, almost sadness, because we're not creating a good long-term dynamic in doing that. We may be doing the right short-term thing. We're doing something that's ultimately going to be, make it even harder for who's left to go ahead. Thanks for what you're doing.
Thanks.
Hi, General. My name is Katie Dolan. I'm a junior at the college. Thank you so much for being here. How do you think that the potential lack of trust in government that some young people have, whether it's through sort of congressional inaction or the results of the recent election, contribute to their willingness to participate in a national service program like you outlined, and how do you think we could fix that?
Yeah, in terms of participation in a national service program, what we see from polling and whatnot from young people, that's not the problem. We have a demand to serve. What we don't have is the capacity to offer those opportunities. There's a limitation when you get to the who's going to pay for it and who's going to organize it mode, because it's another thing to pay for. It competes with other priorities, and it right now doesn't have a strong constituency, because there's not a lot of people out protesting in the streets says you've got to get national service through. And essentially, we need to get there. You know, political leaders are good people, but when you get in there, their interests are not aligned always with long-term things. Your short-term requirement is to get reelected, and in today's world, because the parties are much weaker, your short-term interests are also aligned to sort of being away from your party so that you don't get pulled into things. So in reality, we've got rational behavior by individual political actors, which cumulatively is irrational behavior because we can't get things done. But everybody sort of passes, I'm being rational, it just, you know, cumulative is irrational. I think the only thing that makes something like this go to the scale it needs to is going to be pressure, and it's going to be pressure from some older people, but it's also going to be pressure from your generation. And your generation saying, we have got to do something different, and this is something that we can really make a difference. Now, this is not satisfying because it costs money now and it doesn't pay for a while. And so it's another thing where it doesn't compete as equally with certain things, shovel-ready projects and whatnot. But I would tell you long-term, it's like education or prenatal care. If you don't get it right, you're going to pay at some point. And this is a way, I think, to save long-term. Thanks so much.
Sir.
Good evening, General. It's been an honor to hear you this evening.
Smile.
My name is Prakash Hebar, and I work for U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington. Been a naturalized citizen for the past 10 years. So I was an Indian citizen for 50 years, and I plan to be a U.S. citizen for the next 50 years. So my question is, I'm raising 2 boys. They are naturalized citizens like me. In your initiative, if it comes through, how do you include kids of other backgrounds or countries of origin to be a part of this new society that you want to create?
Yeah.
The debate, the current debate, is not very positive. So how do you include people who look different, who speak differently? Thank you.
No, I think that's one of the most critical things. If you go back to the great cross-leveling events back in American history, those times when, like World War II or whatever, and you put people together that didn't necessarily think they were gonna, they came back different. And they came back with a much different understanding of groups that otherwise were sort of misunderstood or suspicious to them. My view, and I'm thinking this program in the United States only in terms of the origin of kids, I would have every young person involved, whether they are yet naturalized. If they're living here, they're involved. They volunteered. I would also extend it to everyone of course, every economic background, so that's the reason paid. You don't want it limited to just families who can support their kids. But also, even handicapped. Unless someone is so severely handicapped it's just impossible, we don't want to deprive them of the opportunity to get satisfaction from that, self-esteem, because you don't want them to carry that burden later in life. And we have the ability to do that now. There's plenty of things we can do from people of all. So that would be the first thing. It would be everybody's involved, and I think it would have that kind of cross-leveling effect. Also, part of the actual service would be overseas. Not for every kid, but for a percentage of them. And it would be doing things like the Peace Corps. One of the things I also think we are pretty weak on is understanding what's happening in other cultures outside our borders. And more opportunities we can give. The vast majority, just for practical reasons, would be within the United States. But there would be some out there, and I think that's an essential sensitization education process that I think is critical.
Thank you.
Thanks, sir.
General McChrystal, my name is Ben Bolger. I'm a Harvard alumnus. My question is that you've dealt with a number of public servants and interacted with a number of complex proposals. And I was wondering if you could reflect, when you present an important but complicated proposal or plan for action, what level of detail or what level of abstraction is best? And I think of, for example, President Carter had a great appetite for detail. Perhaps more recent leaders maybe have a desire for shorter levels of detail. So in order to help people make important decisions, how do you structure the level of information that you give to them?
Yeah, I am the least qualified person in this room to answer that question effectively. We've got some real pros here. But here's what I think, and I can be corrected after the fact. We have to be able to paint a narrative that is somewhat abstract. We need to be able to paint a picture, which I tried for you tonight, is what happens if we don't do it? What happens if we do it? People go, oh shit, and people go, this would be great. And we got to get there. And then clearly, you can have people tear it apart and go, yeah, but. And the problem is, this would be one of those things that would never be perfect in implementation. As you start to do it, it'd have to be constantly tweaked. You'd have cases where certain things didn't happen like you want to, so you have to do it. But we'd have to put as high a standards as possible. And that's one of the great lessons I've learned from City Year, AmeriCorps, Teach for America. If you don't get execution right, you kill your program long term. So I think you'd have to give, but only a percentage of policy wonks would, in the beginning, would tear apart the numbers. The average people vote or support based upon, because they can get, I mean, they absolutely understand. They don't want this and they do want this. And I think we should go there. Then in the execution, of course, we got to be fanatical about discipline and getting it right. You can't start something and then turn your back and say it was a good idea. I'm sorry we didn't do it well. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Yeah.
Good evening, General. My name is Ron Mendoza. I'm a naturalized citizen, been in service, retired Air Force, and working now under the National Nuclear Security in Amarillo, Texas.
We let Air Force people be citizens?
Oh, I know. Yeah, well
look how liberal we are now.
Yeah, I was wondering, I was listening to your speech, and you said to create cultural expectations to the citizenship. On 2015, I was baffled by the terror in San Bernardino. I hope you guys remember it in 2015 when Saeed Farouk killed like 14 people in San Bernardino. And I was reading through that, and quite baffled me that he had become a citizen and become naturalized way back then before the incident happened. So I had to become a naturalized citizen. And I remember those times that I raised my hand on the flag and do the oath of office that I will serve the United States of America and so on and so on. And I came back to that oath and I look at that, and one thing comes into my mind that we need to do something more on this oath of office. And I inserted the fact that, that we need to, that I look in the fact that I need to insert this statement on the oath of allegiance to the United States of America, that as a citizen, that you will not participate or condone any acts of terrorism against the United States of America and its territories. And I think it should be the requirements for all the citizenship around here. But I think that, I don't know if everybody feels like that, but as a natural citizen, I think it's a gift that I have right now because I really enjoyed it. And I don't know, what do you think of that idea, sir?
I probably, and not just for naturalized citizens, I think every citizen ought to have the expectation, and I probably wouldn't list it as things you don't do, because it could make the list pretty long. I probably try to make it in list or a very short statement of what you do. And a citizen, if you think about it, ought to be committed and responsible for other citizens, for their welfare, for making America a better place, which means being fair and the kind of society we want it to be, because really citizenship is just a covenant between all the citizens. It's like a club that decides what the rules are going to be. And I think we ought to have very broad but very clear rules that say we're here to make the place fair for everybody, safe, secure. This is what I commit. If I don't want to sign up for that, then maybe you know, I really don't want the citizenship that this particular organization, but I get really nervous if we start doing loyalty oaths or lists of what we do or don't do, because the writing of them can take you in strange places.
Thanks, sir.
Well said. Thank you, sir.
Please.
Good evening, General. I'm a student at the college. My name is Kezia Clark, and so my question is this program more effective as maybe a private organization versus a government organization that would fall, I guess, prey to the political needs of elected officials versus something that's run by citizens who believe in the value of citizenship?
No, it's a great question. I wouldn't have been able to even have an opinion on this a few years ago. I think it has to be a combination of the two. You must have the commitment of the nation to the government, which means that the national government has got to have skin in the game, which means commitment to it, law, funding, and whatnot. You also need commitment similarly at the state and local level, so everybody signs up, plus everybody gets a vote. But you're never going to make this work completely well if it's just a government thing, because then I think it suffers all the challenges of government bureaucracies. And so I think it's got to be a public-private partnership in which we try to get philanthropy, but also some of the rigor of the business place to make this work really well in each of those instances. And we ought to be able to make that connection work pretty well. It also makes the financial part a little less. And when you have philanthropy and American citizens also investing directly, you get more commitment as well. So that's my take on it. Thank you.
Have a question there? Can I ask a question
Sure.
myself? I read a piece by you last week in the New York Times, and I saw your name, and I had some sense of what it might be about, but it wasn't about that at all. It was a piece arguing for the importance of the public broadcasting system. Yeah. Can you say a bit about why you felt strongly enough about that topic to write about it?
Yeah. I live in Alexandria, Virginia, and next door to me lives my son and my daughter-in-law and my two granddaughters. So one of them's just about to turn 3, and if I was against Elmo, she'd cut me off at the knees. So, but no, think about it. Here's what I learned. It kind of came to it slowly. I went to Iraq, and I mean, I always had ideas about this, but this is where it pounded into me. I went to Iraq, and I was a counter-terrorist leader, and they said, okay, go get the bad guys. Great. Boom, boom, boom. And that's what we did. And for 5 years, that's what I did. And, you know, the carnage was significant. Then I realized that there's no way you solve the problem there. You have to solve the problem upstream. And you got to solve, in a place like Iraq, you've got to go after why are people being terrorists? What about societies doing it? What about governance? Now that gets a lot harder, and it's a lot less neater and clean and doesn't make good movies, but that's the only place you solve the problem. I transfer that to American society, and I say, okay, if there are things America needs to be down the line, the only place you set the conditions for those are way upstream. And so I would tell you, if we don't get our diplomacy right, we can't spend enough money on defense. There's not enough money in the world. If we don't get the education of our kids right, if we don't get the culture of our kids right, there aren't enough prisons to be built. There aren't enough of anything. And so, you know, I know people kind of laugh about it, you know, Stan McChrystal's interested in, you know, Elmo and stuff like that. Well, I am. Because I watch my granddaughters watch it. I watch how it affects his people. It's just something that makes us a little bit better, and it doesn't cost very much. And so why wouldn't we do that? And, you know, the thought was, and I got advice that we do this, the thought was, coming from me, people would do exactly what you do. They might read it because, oh, look at that.
Yes, indeed. Thank you. Sir.
Sir.
Hi, General McChrystal. Thank you for the opportunity to sit in. I'm Joshua Sheck. I'm with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, Aviation Weather Center. After more than a dozen years in civil service, it's clear to me that civil servants, enlisted officers are sort of, they look at serving differently. I hope that's fair. I'm sure that applies to the city or et cetera, Peace Corps. And you're talking about such a heavy lift. In my world, we build a little, test a little kind of thing. Have you considered an approach where maybe it's not such a heavy lift, where we incrementally expand and really cause culture change a little at a time?
Yeah, the answer is, yeah, you're right. And we've sort of been doing that for 60 years, Peace Corps. And the problem is we just haven't been able to get out of second gear. And great things have been happening, but every time there's pressure on the budget, it kind of gets those things that get pressured. And as a consequence, because the percentage of people who are the World War II era goes down, that DNA of service has not been able to be grown. And my worry about too incremental approach is that we just accept little increments and we get a few more people each year and we go, boy, this is great. By the year 2240, we'll make some effect on society. So I think it's important, one, we not do that. The second thing is trying to get America to change how it thinks it's going to be a bit of a quantum shock. And I think we don't want another World War to do this. We don't want another depression. We don't want something like that. But I don't think we need to create a crisis to argue for this. I would argue that we probably have enough of a crisis in what we're doing for our young people, what we're not doing for our young people, that warrants it. It's just because it's a slowly unfolding crisis, it doesn't brief as well as a hurricane or a war.
Thank you.
We are also, I'm sorry, I forgot one other thing. We are doing incremental things, focusing on certain areas like cities, going in and putting specific focus areas there, because that's proof. You get to an area, you have significant effect, a program works, then you can point people at it. So that's a great point. Thank you.
Over here.
General McChrystal, you honor us with your presence.
Oh, you're kind.
I'm Eric Elbot. I develop neurotechnologies for national security. I want to go back to Alexander the Great, since you went back in history and you obviously savor it. He had a military operation that beat the Persian Empire very rapidly, came to Afghanistan, thought he basically marched through to India, and then got stuck there for a few years. Kind of a familiar formula in Afghanistan. And at a certain point, he said, I can't make it happen in the way that I've made it happen everywhere else. I've got to think myself into the Afghan mind. And so he did creative things like told his soldiers to marry the women that they were consorting with so that they would become members of the family as an occupation force. And he held Olympic Games with the best Afghan warriors, and the people who won the contest he recruited into his army and marched them off to India. And he married the daughter of the most powerful king and then got his new father-in-law to beat all the other kings. So he thought out of the box. And our presence in Afghanistan most of the time spoke to these first 3 years that he was stuck. There's that old cliche now that we haven't been in Afghanistan 15 years. We've been there 15 first years because there's been no learning curve. And when you arrived there, you represented that possibility of a learning curve and a possibility of thinking out of the box. And your JSOC approach of recapturing the night when the Taliban operated was perhaps the only really effective thing that we've done. And I'm very sorry that we lost a lot of your energy there. But could you speak to this issue of, you talked about the discipline of the warrior, but the ability to think out of the box. How can you reintroduce, or how can you create a culture in the US military of thinking out of the box and thinking into the tribal way of thinking into the mind of the enemy? Because we're not going to get out of Afghanistan otherwise. We're just calling for more troops again today.
You are right about everything except your kind words about me, but I'll take them. No, a military trains for war, and there's a desire to train for the war you want to fight. Sometimes that's the last war, sometimes that's the enemy you think, but wars are best when they're neat and clean and the enemy is easily identifiable. It's got certain formations, and you can train against that, you develop doctrine against that, you develop materials against that. I spent much of my career completely focused on defeating the Krasnovians, who were the Soviets. And so you do that. And the idea is you're going to run the power sweep when you're on the game on Sunday and you're going to go out and play. And then you get up across a team and it's not the Krasnovians, it's somebody completely different. And we've had that happen in countless wars, and we're not the only military that has that happen. At the end of the day, military people of every rank have got to be problem solvers. That ought to be their job description. Their job description should not be warrior, it should not be tactician, it should not be anything, it should be problem solver. So don't fight the war that you planned for, solve the problem that's in front of you, and sometimes it's war, sometimes it's, as you described, Afghanistan was not about defeating the Taliban, it was about getting the government to function well enough that it was credible with the people, which was harder. The Taliban really were not the biggest problem when I got there in 2009. They only were successful based upon the weakness of the government. And so, but that's hard, that's really hard, and it's particularly hard for a military, and it's particularly hard when you rotate units through, you change people, you don't have language skills and those sort of things. And so, what I would say is the approach to the problem needs to be holistic, it needs to be long-term, it needs to be discussed before we start, because the average counterinsurgency takes 11 years to lose, 13 years to win. And if you say that at the beginning, okay, we're going to go do this, and you say, well, if we're good, we'll be out in 11 years. If we're bad, we'll be out in 13. Or, I'm sorry, the opposite. People would go, whoa. One, do we want to do this? And if we do, they'll gird their loins, they'll make the decision, and they'll do it. And I think that's a much more realistic and difficult decision to make. But you're exactly right. We won't be successful around the world when we don't do that. I mean, there'll be the occasional, like the first Gulf War, when Saddam Hussein puts his army out in the desert. He lets us spend 6 months lining up in front of it, you know, like a golfer on a tee, and then whack it. He's the last knucklehead that will ever do that. Everyone else will fight in a way that is adapted to what we're not good at. They'd be insane not to. Thank you very much.
I thank you.
Can I ask you one more question?
Yes, sir.
Myself? One of our students at the Kennedy School came to see me last week. Two students came. One had been a Marine officer, spent time in Afghanistan. The other was a woman, a civilian background. Yeah. And they came as they're organizing this year's Veterans Impact Day at the Kennedy School. And David Gergen and the Center for Public Leadership have been instrumental in supporting this effort. And the concern that they expressed was about what they view as a civilian-military divide in this country. And one of the main points of this day is to try to narrow that divide by having mostly civilians at the Kennedy School interact with veterans, help at veterans projects around the city, and just spend time with veterans. How do you see the civilian-military divide in this country?
It is very real and very significant. It's not quite what some people think it is. As I described to some people this afternoon, when I was here as a national security fellow, you know, I'm in class in blue jeans, and I've been, hanging out with people for a while, and one of the young students goes, "You're in the Army?" And I said, "I am." And he goes, "Well, that's interesting, because you seem kind of smart." I said, "Really? Okay." Not many people say that to me, so it was a shock anyway. But there was just this absolute lack of familiarity. And so on the civilian side, they've never touched one, they've just never seen one, we're the albino unicorn. And you say, well, okay, it's the civilian problem. Well, in the military, when I would travel around to bases in Afghanistan, my last tour, and even at JSOC, I'd land at these little Beaugest type forts, and you'd get out to be an American platoon or a company minus 50 to 100 guys, and you'd get out, and the company commander, platoon leader, or sergeants were kids of friends of mine in the military. Every time. I'd go upon them and I'd see so-and-so, and I knew the kid in high school or junior high, because this tight professional military grows up together, stays in this, lives on bases. It's a wonderful camaraderie, but it's become guild-like. Now, it's proficient in what it does, but that's not really very helpful. They marry each other. I was just at a wedding the other night, and it's great young lady, great young guy, but that's who you know. And then you start to have interactions. Megan would be familiar with this. You get to the White House and you go in your uniform, and you deal with people who haven't done with the military before, and you feel really good because you got your military on, because you got badges, bows, and all this kind of stuff. And you don't remember that it's an absolute wall between you and them, because they look at you and they see the uniform. You think, hey, it's just me. They see the uniform and they can be, depending upon who they are, they can be intimidated or they can be negative or whatever. You think you're being who you should be, saying yes ma'am, no sir, being, holding upright. But really what's happening is that divide isn't getting crossed. And so the biggest thing we've done is we've let them grow separate. And neither's negative, neither's more right than the other. Very true. If you go back and read Team of Rivals again, you'll find that the senior leadership of the military and Lincoln's new cabinet didn't know each other at all, and they came at it completely different. It took 2.5 years for them to sort it out and start to trust each other and realize you have to do that. So rather than separate it, I think we need to integrate this stuff. I personally, and I'm a little iconoclastic on this, I would change West Point, Naval Academy. I'd still keep them all, but I'd put future civil servants in there as well, in all of them. And the reason you need that is 20 years later, when you're across a table, one of the people across the table should have been in your wedding. That really makes a difference. And so they'll throw me out of West Point to hear that.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid that we are actually out of time. Yes, but if we could borrow a few more minutes and have really quick questions. Could we have 2 quick questions and then short answers? Okay, please.
General, thanks for your time tonight. My name is Eric Gray. I'm a retired Marine and now work at the Defense Logistics Agency at Fort Belvoir, here for Senior Executive Fellows Program, which is an amazing program. Sir, I want to ask you, as the program you mentioned tonight has incredible merit for our country, are there any members of Congress that express any interest in supporting this and maybe crafting legislation to support that?
Yeah, there are a number of them. Seth Moulton, a young Democratic congressman, is very big on it. On the Senate side, Lindsey Graham, John McCain, and others are supportive. So we've got a bunch of support. What we don't have is this is not a front and center issue. We haven't been able to get it up on the table so people are talking about it. I think more people would support if we kind of get it out there and get it in the national conversation. A lot of great people have been working at it, but it's just hard to compete with all the other stuff that's happening. Simplify and thanks.
Thanks, sir.
Sir, Lieutenant Colonel Tim Wright, United States Army. Range lead the way, sir.
Is this a great year or what?
It's a good year, sir.
Don't ever leave.
Quick question. You got a lot of really capable young folks in this room tonight watching, and then also in Cambridge writ large and the graduate programs that are here. Where are they most needed? Where, when they graduate, would they be best applied? Is it in the leadership of the programs you're talking about? Is it somewhere else in civil service, or maybe someplace we haven't talked at all? And thank you for being here.
It's a great question. They're kind of needed everywhere. I think every young person, particularly the ones come out with these tremendous capabilities that they have, should all at least go touch service again at some point. They don't have to stay there, and they don't have to do it a whole career, because we need people in business, we need people in local government, we need people in the various things. But there's a cohort of people to whom great opportunities for education and connection are going to matter. And then the other point, which you didn't talk about, but I'll grab onto, the connections between you. Those should be really carefully nurtured, and not just as alum of Harvard, but alum of programs where you can make a difference. So you can reach out to people, their level of commitment and talent and all that kind of thing as we go together. Rangers lead the way.
All the way, sir.
General, let me say, for all of us, as citizens of this country and as members of the Kennedy School community, we're so grateful for your service to our country and for your inspiring words tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.